I'm Gelbart555, and today I'm continuing my series of MASH retro reviews with Season 5, Episode 9, Mulcahy's War. So this is really the first episode where Father Mulcahy is the main character, where he is carrying the A plot. So it begins with wounded arriving, of course, and one of the wounded soldiers has a foot wound, most likely self-inflicted. Now most likely we find out that it was self-inflicted. Frank, of course, wants to get him in trouble. Hawkeye decides to, just mess with Frank and say that the guy instantly kicked a bullet. And Frank somehow goes along with it. And then there's a second patient that comes in later, a wounded dog who also has a foot wound because he purposely stepped on a landmine because his handler wasn't paying attention to the dog. And of course, Hawkeye gets Frank to operate on the dog. And there's a later scene where Frank is complaining about having to operate on the dog, and then Hawkeye responds that some vets make more money than doctors, and Frank's entire demeanor changes. I also want to say that if you're ever in a post-apocalyptic setting, like a zombie apocalypse, go to the vet, not a doctor, because vets are probably more likely to survive because they weren't bitten by their patients. Because they have to be trained for that, because dogs and cats actually will bite the vets. Side note aside on that, let's actually talk about the main part of the episode. So Father Mulcahy, at the request of Hawkeye, goes to speak with the soldier who shot himself in the foot. But the soldier doesn't really want to talk because Father Mulcahy had never been to the front, never experienced what it's like before. And also on top of that too is because they both knew the same priest. So that patient's home pastor was a priest that Father Mulcahy learned from when he was in the seminary, who was a chaplain in World War II, who could have probably also heard her, though for a different reason, because apparently that priest put on some good poker games. But anyhow, eventually comes a point in the episode where the aid station is calling, requesting a jeep to take a patient back to the 477 for immediate medical care. Colonel Potter sends Radar and Eagle, but Father Mulcahy asks to go with instead. He doesn't ask permission, he asks for forgiveness instead. And during that, on the way back, the patient takes a turn for the worse. His chest-stomach wound is fine. Well, not fine, but fine and not causing him any immediate problems. But his tongue's swollen and he can't breathe, so they have to call on the radio back to the camp to get directions on what to do. So Father Mulcahy has to perform a tracheotomy on the patient using a pocket knife and his eye drop syringe, which had been set up earlier in the episode, where he's giving himself some eye drops as Radar comes in. Radar thinks he's praying, and then he also lends Colonel Potter some. Radar comes in again and thinks again a worship service is going on. Nice running gag right there, but it all comes to fruition where he uses the syringe of the eye drop as the tube for the tracheotomy to allow the patient to breathe. Very well done in my opinion, and it was a great way of setting up the solution for the tracheotomy since they didn't have anything with them in the first aid kit. And Father Mulcahy being there also, he doesn't ask permission, but it's a good thing he was there because the first aid kit didn't have a knife or anything to go. It had scissors, but not scissors that would have been good for doing tracheotomy. And so Father Mulcahy saves that patient's life, and they're able to get the patient back to the 477, so his chest/stomach wound can actually be taken care of. And then, of course, we get a scene in the old club where Father Mulcahy says like, yes, he knows what he did was wrong, basically. But he doesn't get any punishment for it. Because, he did go without asking. Well, he did ask permission. He was told no. But he does understand that he probably shouldn't have gone. But at the same time, it probably does help him because it gives him more insight into what the soldiers on the front line experience. Because Hawkeye has this line talking about he can only imagine. And Father Mulcahy responds, no, you can't, Hawkeye. You had to be there. And what this comes in is I think this episode deals with the concept of sympathy and empathy. Those things I think are roughly the same, but there is a difference, and I think we often as a society get them mixed up. But I would say empathy is trying to place yourself in the position of someone else. You may or may not have experienced what they are experiencing. You may or may not have experienced something similar, but you're trying to place yourself in that mindset. But sympathy comes from actually understanding what they are experiencing, what they are feeling, because you've had it before. You feel sympathy for them because you know what it is like. Mulcahy, Father Mulcahy, he could only offer empathy before because he had never really experienced it. But now he can offer sympathy in addition to empathy. He can imagine what it's like because he now knows what it's like, or at least knows something similar. Again, I could be partially explaining it incorrectly, but he lacked the ability to properly sympathize and properly empathize with that soldier who shot himself in the foot because he had no idea what it was like on the front, and that got to him. He was troubled by the fact that he couldn't relate to them at all. And that's why he does that, the actions in the episode, why he goes behind Colonel Parr's back to go with radar to the front to pick up that soldier, because he wanted that experience. He wanted to understand what it felt like. And that makes it such a good episode because, yeah, he doesn't go on the actual front lines, but he goes up where the danger is more real, where the danger is more present, because he was troubled because he couldn't properly relate to them. And that's what makes Father Mulcahy such a good character. He, throughout our, is probably one of the best examples of what it means to be actually Christian. He sees that he can't relate, and he puts himself in the situation so he can help them. He tries to help others. He gambles, but he always gives his gambling winnings to the orphanage. He's basically not the stereotypical evangelical Christian that we have nowadays in the United States, and even back then. No, first of all, he's Catholic, one, but two, you can see he puts his faith into practice. He's there when people want you to talk about that, but if they don't want you to talk about it, he's there in that capacity as well. He lives his Christian faith by being a good person, by helping others in the way that helps that person the best. That's what we need more Christians like that in America. I firmly believe that. It would be a great counter to this current rise of Christian nationalism that we are experiencing and seeing. But that's also what makes Father Mulcahy such a good character, because him being the camp chaplain and being a devout, practicing Catholic is a fundamental part of who he is as a character, but you don't think of him as only that. You think about him getting involved in the shenanigans that are going on in the camp. You think about him participating in events, think about him being there to help others when they need it. You think about him as more than just the chaplain. You think about how he interacts with other characters, how he supports them, and how he tries to be there for them. In this episode, he realizes he's lacking that ability to be there for certain soldiers, and he takes it upon himself to gain that experience so he could fulfill his duties. He could fulfill the obligation he feels, his desire to help others. He sees in how he's lacking, and he looks for a way to overcome that challenge that he is facing. And that's just such a brilliant thing. Maybe I gave more thoughts about this than the writers did, but I'm not quite sure, because it is a very deep, for lack of a better term, maybe not super deep, but very profound character arc. How many times in the show do you have a character saying, I know what it feels like, or I understand how that feels, but have never actually experienced it? Here, Father Mulcahy is confronted with the characters pointing out that he doesn't actually know, and he decides he has to do something so he can know. And honestly, that's what makes Father Mulcahy probably one of the best characters in MASH. And this episode is a perfect showcase of that. But those just happen to be my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my latest retro review. I do hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please be sure to give this video a like. Also, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. And I hope to see you for my very next video.